So we're going to transition now to this fishbowl conversation between the chief risk taker, founder and president of Just Leadership, Glenn Martin, and the assistant attorney general over the Office of Justice Programs, my boss, Carol Mason, and they're going to come and have this conversation about where we are right now in this country with ending mass incarceration and restoring the rights of people who've been in contact with the criminal justice system. So thank them, y'all. Welcome them to the space.
So I'm going to fill a little bit of this gap up here, if you don't mind. So first of all, I want to thank John Legend, too, but for a different reason. I want to thank John Legend for making it okay for light-skinned cats to be up here on this stage. So just to fill a little bit of this gap we have in here, and to give you a sense of how powerful we hope this moment is going to be, I want to do a Daryl. So I want to tell a story, and I want to tell a story about my visit to the White House and how far we've come from the day of that visit to the White House. So my visit to the White House was a little bit earlier than the Love Fest we were talking about all morning. And I was with a bunch of my colleagues, about 50 of them, down the block from the White House, and we were having a conversation about mass incarceration and policing in the United States. And then we knew afterwards we were going to get up and walk down the block to the White House and have a discussion with policy advisors to the president. And as you can imagine, as someone who's been doing this work for 15 years, as someone who's learned most of what he's learned from the people who are sitting here on this stage, who stands on the shoulder of people like Dorsey and Eddie Ellis and Vivian Nixon and other people who've been in the movement a lot longer than I have, the idea of getting to go to the White House and talk about these issues was like, I couldn't even sit through that 8-hour meeting before we got there. And so we start walking down the block to the White House, and I'm with the district attorney from Atlanta, and we're talking about the things he's doing in his office to lock less people up, and I'm trying to convince him of the importance of including the voices of formerly incarcerated people in his work and in his office. And then we get to the White House, and everybody's going through, and if you got a criminal record and you got to go through anything where somebody got a badge, you're like, oh boy, here we go. And I get up to the front, and I notice everybody's got a green ID, and I get this pink ID. And now Just Leadership's colors are pink and charcoal, but I didn't think they rolled out the pink ID so that I would just be well-branded that day. And it said, needs escort on it. And as you can imagine, my heart sunk, and all the butterflies you get in your stomach, and all the shame that comes with all of that. And everyone else walked through, and I'm standing there, and I get to the last point in security. There's 3-4 levels of security. And there's a Secret Service agent, and he's about where I am now. He's sitting at a desk. He's really high up. I'm sort of down there. And he sees the ID, and he's like, wait, you can't go any further. And I'm like, what do you mean I can't go any further? I was invited to the White House. And he said, but that ID suggests you need an escort. And I said, well, where am I supposed to get an escort? He said, well, who invited you here? I said, policy advisors to the president. And he was like, well, then they need to come downstairs and get you. And I was like, oh, I get to work on that right away. And so I'm standing there, and I'm texting, and I'm emailing, and I'm calling everyone who went ahead of me to try to get somebody to understand what's happening with me. And I'm going to talk about the initial sort of feeling of shame when I get to the end, but I'm going to talk about where this all culminates. And finally, after about 35 minutes, this is an hour-long meeting. I'm stuck there 35 minutes trying to get somebody to come get me. And after about 35 minutes, the door swings open behind him, and there's this young, white, maybe 23-year-old intern. And she says, you're Mr. And I was like, yes, I've been waiting here forever. Can you take me upstairs? And she's like, of course, I'm so sorry. And she grabs me and she takes me. And we walk about 100 feet over to the elevator. And she looks back at me. She's like, you're Mr. Davison, right? I was like, oh, no, my name is Mr. Martin, but please don't take me back. Like, please take me upstairs to this meeting. And so you see the irony. Don't lose the irony, right? Black man, formerly incarcerated, 21-year-old conviction, invited to the White House, has a hard time getting in. Young white intern kicks the door open, grabs whoever the hell she wants, and takes him on his way. Hold on to that for a minute. So I get up to the meeting. And the meeting's halfway done, and they're asking everyone, what was the most powerful thing that you talked about today that you would like to convey to people who advise the President of the United States? And as you can imagine, that was a moment to tell them about the shame that was associated with being told I couldn't enter the White House. And the fact that that experience happening in the White House, what does that mean for the message that the White House is sending to the rest of the country about 70 million Americans who are now affected by this system? 70 million Americans who are living with the lifetime punishment associated with the system. And I remember when I got on that Amtrak train to go back home, if you're from New York or Philly or Connecticut, you get it, you ride that Amtrak back and forth to DC. I was like, what do I do with that experience? And I just started penning a letter right there on the train to the President of the United States. And ultimately, I released that letter as an open letter. And it was about how the people who are sitting in this room, no matter what their experience is in the criminal justice system, that they have hope like every other American, that they want opportunity like every other American, that they want to contribute, that they have families to take care of, that they have communities that they care about, and that we are not that much different than people who have not been involved in the system, and therefore, there but the grace of God go I. And I got to say this, the president received my letter. I received a number of phone calls. And I was told that the president was going to take that letter seriously and that they were going to speak the Secret Service. Oh, this is Obama now. Hold on. I'm going to call him back. I'm going to call him back. So listen, that's good fucking timing. That was good timing, right? So we getting them mics, right? My story's almost over. We got to get this mic. So listen, the reason I tell this story is this. At Just Leadership USA, we say people who are closest to the problem are closest to the solution. Why do we say that? Because we're in a country where if we're going to get out of this mess that we've gotten ourselves into for the last 4.5 decades, it's going to take Americans understanding that we are human beings, that we're not the labels that have been put on us by the system to other us, that we're fathers and mothers and sisters and brothers, and that although you see 7, 8 leaders up on this stage right now telling you how we got here today, the fact of the matter is that if we only keep being held up as leaders, then that's a failure to the movement. And the reason we've come here today and brought everyone here today and we're lifting up your leadership is that if you've ever looked at any successful movement in this country or anywhere else for that matter, it is the people who are most oppressed by a system that rise up into leadership, that define that oppression, and that set the path out of that oppression. And that is what today is about. Today is not about the leaders who brought us here. Today is about every single leader in this room. So let me get back to this meeting that we had that you saw the picture of right there. Obviously, when that picture happened, we came a long way from that experience I had at the White House. And not only did we come a long way, but when we sat in that room, we met policymakers like Carol Mason and her colleagues who wanted to hear our story, who gave us time to not just talk about the policy prescriptions to get us out of this mess, but they listened to the moral argument for why they needed to be more courageous before this administration ended. And not only did they listen to it, they promised to give us space to talk to them every single month since then. And they have kept that promise. And they have made a number of policy changes that they say, and I hope Carol is going to repeat this up here. I'm putting her on the spot, but I know she would have did it without me saying it, that much of what they've been able to accomplish, much of the energy, much of the resources they have put into this comes from not just the fact that we laid out a prescription for what we knew formerly incarcerated people wanted going back to 2009, but for why they had a responsibility to spend their privilege to make it happen. And so this is going to be a conversation that gives you a sense of what the work looks like since then. But what you should know is that I'm sitting up here with someone who is, I always say that, institutions change people long before people change institutions, unfortunately. But every once in a while, you find that rare person that does the opposite, that walks into an institution and that spends their political capital, that invests their courage, that takes risks to turn institutions around. And so, ladies and gentlemen, Carol Mason. Okay, we're gonna share the mic. So Carol said I made her cry. Like Dorsey, like Kenny, they always crying. Okay, so I love them, but they always crying. All right, cool. I want to make sure everybody can see me. I'm going to move up just a little bit, ask Carol to move over just a little bit. So I'm going to try not to be Matt Lauer up here and give you softball questions. I'm going to ease into it, but I ain't going to treat you like he treat Donald Trump. All right, cool. So this administration has opened the door of communication between policymakers and justice-involved people for the first time. How has this give and take helped your efforts to bring about change? And can you share any suggestions you have on how to improve or change our communication and to grow and deepen that partnership?
So he's giving me the mic now so I can say what I want to say and not just answer his question. And so the first thing I want to say is thank you. Thank you to all of you all. And I know that Glenn and Daryl and Dorsey and Norris and Vivian and Susan, that they represent you all. But I want you to know that while they're up here on the stage, we don't forget the millions of people that are behind them that they're giving voice to. And so I want to say thank you all for trusting them to represent you. And thank you all for raising your voices. Now, so one of the things, and I almost forgot the question, but one of the things that I hope that you all see about this administration, it's about giving voice to people who haven't had voice. And for those of you who saw Hamilton or who have heard about Hamilton, and I've said this often because many of you in this room have been in the White House more than once, multiple times, you're in the room when it's happening. And you're in the room today when it's happening. The room isn't just at the White House. The room is wherever you all are, speaking up, talking out. And he talks about changing institutions. I just, again, get to represent people who are so committed to doing this work. And I'm going to embarrass her, but Deanna Haskins, please stand up. So Deanna is one of the newest additions to the Department of Justice, but not to this work. And she is over our corrections portfolio at the Department of Justice. So that is huge. We are not just talking the talk, we are walking the walk at the Department of Justice. And Daryl, who you've already seen, who's our inaugural, notice we said inaugural, he's not the last, second chance fellow at the Department of Justice, you need to understand why that happened. That meeting that we talked about in June of 2014 and that picture that they had up on the screen, every year I do a photo of special moments from that year. That photo is in my book. That photo is on my iPad. That photo is in my office because it's important. You're important. This work is important. And so out of that meeting, they said to us, you need somebody close advising you all on this work. So that's the regular meetings we have. We come to the quarterly convenings. This is not my first time at these meetings. This is the first national event, but this is not my first time. And I love when I got to the hotel last night, I saw Dorsey, I saw Manuel, I was hugging folks. I saw friends, people I respect and partners in this work with. So in answer to so one of the things they said to us is you need somebody close to you all advising. And so Amy Solomon, who you heard about, who is like the fiercest person you've ever seen. Former Attorney General Holder called her his General Eisenhower. She said, we need to do a second chance fellow. We need to bring somebody in here advising us. And the applications were so powerful, we saw so many people, we started talking to our other agencies and said, one isn't enough. You all need some support too. And so Vivian's advising the Department of Education. So your voices matter. And so we're going to have a change in administration. We know that. So I have two things I want to say. One is that keep talking, keep talking, keep talking. Keep demanding things from whoever has my seat, from whoever has everybody's seat, whoever has John King's seat. The other thing that I want you to understand is that just because I'm moving out of this seat doesn't mean that I'm ever stopping this conversation and stopping this work. I am your partner in this work forever, and as I was teasing Deanna earlier, my First Amendment rights get restored. Because when you work at the Department of Justice in a political position, you've got to be careful about what you say. I will be unchained and uncensored and representing you all.
Thanks, Carol. So before talking about the significant accomplishments of the Federal Interagency Reentry Council, let's touch on a few fundamental questions. President Obama has said, quote, "Mass incarceration makes our country worse off, and we need to do something about it." What would an end to mass incarceration look like?
So, you all know the statistics, and if you haven't, I carried this up here for a reason. If you don't have a copy of this report, the Federal Interagency Council report, it's their first ever report, get one. It's a powerful story of the work that's been going on in this administration dating back to prior to 2011, but it starts talking about when the Reentry Council was formed in 2011. But I think in terms of what does an end to mass incarceration look like, it looks like we stop being a country that represents 5% of the population, the world's population, but 20% of the incarcerated population in the world. It looks like a country that we keep using the word second chance, and Secretary Perez and I have talked about this, both talked about we need a better label because there are too many people that never had a first chance. And so an era where we don't have mass incarceration looks like an era where everybody has opportunity. No matter, that you see all these billboards along the side that say about children talking about your opportunity should not be determined by your zip code. Your opportunity should not be determined by your life circumstances. And this president has been working really hard. He calls it ladders of opportunity, making sure we provide ladders of opportunity for everybody. And that includes people, especially, who've been formerly incarcerated and your families. You talked about that earlier, that we need to really understand and recognize that when we incarcerate somebody, it's not just that person who is serving that time, it's also their family. So for me, the end to mass incarceration means a rise of an era of opportunity for everybody.
Thank you. So I'm going to give you some space to tell us about some of the successes of the Federal Interagency Reentry Council. I have a lot of people asking me while I'm traveling around the country sort of what's coming out of that council, what's the body of work look like, and importantly, like how can it be replicated? And even tell us maybe about some of the reentry programs that have been successful, and what do you think accounts for the success of the ones who've emerged as successful reentry programs?
Okay, that's a lot of question. In terms of the successes that we've had, and the successes, I'm looking for because she's going to come back and make me hold it right. The successes that we've had in this administration, you've heard about many of them, but one of my favorites is the day that we went to a state prison in Maryland with the Secretaries of Education and the Attorney General and people from the White House, and Vivian and Glenn were there, among others. And we sat through a class I sat through the women's class and the men's class that Goucher College has in the prison system, and that was before the announcement of the Pell Grants. And you could see and hear from these men and women the impact of having an opportunity to have an education, how that transforms not just their lives, but their families' lives. These men were talking about how because their children were proud of them for getting a college education, and the kids, they were focused on their own children's education and able to participate in it. So that day when we announced the Pell Grant pilot, and I encourage you all to really work hard to make sure that that is not a pilot and that law gets changed. And it's actually 67 colleges and universities and 100 correctional institutions that will benefit from that. So that's 12,000, as Vivian said, people who will benefit from this pilot. That's huge, but it's not enough. One of many other successes, the ban the box, and to have the Office of Personnel Management direct federal agencies to ban the box is huge. It's huge. There are exceptions, but when you see that the Department of Justice can figure out how to do it, and we've got tougher rules than anybody else, everybody can do it. So I am energized by the changes and energized by what's happening. The beyond the box that the Department of Education is talking about. I want to tell you quickly about one program that I went to recently. I went to a debate at the Atlanta Federal Penitentiary where men who were resident there debated the world champion Morehouse debate team. And I can tell you who won hands down. It was those men at the Atlanta Penitentiary. It was, now, is this being filmed? Is this being filmed and recorded?
I think it is.
Okay, then I'll be careful.
Catch her in the hallways afterwards.
Yeah, they were phenomenal, phenomenal. And what that says to me, and I know this isn't your question, but you know, it's not just lip service when we say there is so much talent that this country needs that is tied up in our criminal justice system. Talent that if we want, you know, I'm not going to say that either, we're being filmed. So I told you I'll get my First Amendment rights restored shortly. But if we want to be a country that continues to excel and continues to be number one, we need all of you all contributing to the success of this country. And, you know, I love it when you talk to Daryl, Vivian, Glenn, Dorsey. They all are really, really clear. They said, I'm not exceptional. I'm not extraordinary. I've just had extraordinary opportunity. And what we want to do is make sure that everybody, it's not going to be just the handful of folks that have an extraordinary opportunity. So what we're also doing and what we've also done, thank you for raising the volume, is HUD. For example, everybody, as a result of this work through the Reentry Council, everybody thought, oh, if you had a criminal record, you can't live in public housing. That's just wrong. And it's been corrected, and we're correcting it. And if you continue to encounter it where it happens, let us know so that we can get to those public housing agencies to make sure they understand what the facts really are. And HUD went beyond that this year. And Secretary Castro announced that let people know that if you do certain things as private landowners, renters, landlords, it could possibly violate the Fair Housing Act. So we are putting people on notice that it is not a disqualifying event because you happen to have had an encounter with the criminal justice system. And as the president's always talking about, you know, it could be any of us. And you know, everybody has been impacted by this era of mass incarceration. I have cousins who have served time. And it is not a disqualifying event for love and caring for people and wanting people to succeed. Oh, you've got one.
I got my own. So like just about every other conversation about mass incarceration, the word men gets said 80% more often than women. And I've learned that from some really powerful women who are in this room today, Andrea and Donna and Vivian and others. And the women associated with Just Leadership USA, and I appreciate them for that, because as a man in this space, in this movement, and probably more importantly in this country, they have time and time again pointed out my own privilege and my own patriarchy and how that gets in the way of their voices and their leadership. And so I want to talk about women for a minute with respect to the criminal justice system. So according to the Sentencing Project, women are the fastest growing segment of the prison population, and more than 60% have children under 18. This is a national tragedy. The children left behind are at risk for many physical, emotional, and social problems, and reentry for women who are mothers of young children is especially challenging. What are your thoughts about this growing crisis?
So, and women, we have not forgotten you. And I know that several of you in this room were at the Women in Criminal Justice event at the White House as well. So it is definitely in the forefront of this administration's priorities. One of the things we know is, we know two things. If we want people to be successful when they leave the care of our criminal justice system, and it ought to be the care of our criminal justice system, it should not be a penal institution, but we'll get to that later. But we ought to make sure that people retain relationships with their families. And so one of the things that we are trying to mirror through what we do at the Bureau of Prisons is to find ways to make sure that families stay connected to their children. So the Bureau of Prisons, Charles Samuels, who is the former head of the Bureau of Prisons, and I have had many conversations about how do we help families stay connected to their children. And so we can't send money. I can't send our money at the Office of Justice Programs to the Bureau of Prisons because they're another federal agency. But we didn't let that stop us. We got creative. And so this year, we awarded the grant in September of last year, and this is the first year of operation. We've got 3 pilot sites happening at 3 federal prisons, including the women's prison in Connecticut, to figure out how do we make sure that the children stay connected to their parents. And the way we're doing it is through funding organizations in communities where there's a higher concentration of, so we're finding organizations close to where the federal prisons are located to try and reach those families. We know, for example, that DC, most of the folks there wind up in the Hazleton correction system, which has a women's prison, men's prison. And so we're trying to figure out how to bridge that gap. The Bureau of Prisons itself is committed to figuring out how to maintain those relationships. They've done a number of creative things like having the events where their kids can come over and have a sleepover, but we're trying to figure out how to do that on a sustained basis. Secretary King and I, during reentry week this past year that the administration had, met with children of incarcerated parents and some of the parents now to try to figure out how do we allow parents to still be parents when they're incarcerated. So for example, how do you stay involved in your child's education? And we are using this pilot that we're doing in the 3 BOP sites to model and figure out how do we find ways to video in so that principals can still talk to the kids about what's happening with their child's education. So the other thing that we are doing, well, I think he's going to get to a question about that later, but since you brought it up, I think the biggest thing we could do is try to figure out how not to be putting people in prison who shouldn't be in prison. One of the things that we know is that the path for most women to prison is not the same. It's different. It often involves being sexually victimized. And one of the things that we have done, again, through this administration is we changed the rules so that our crime victims' money can be used to provide victim assistance for people who are incarcerated. That's a change. That's a huge change. You should be clapping. That is a huge change. Because we know that, and it's not just women, it's men, it's young, that many people who are in our criminal justice system, if you look at the foundation, they've been victimized, traumatized, and our goal is to figure out how to deal with the trauma and address things. We've got the Office for Victims of Crime last year funded, and we are continuing to fund a program to figure out how to deal with male survivors of violence, to, again, break that cycle and deal with the violence that people have experienced. So it's a lot of answers, but we are focused on looking at not just where people are and helping people move forward, but we've got to look at the systemic issues that bring people into the criminal justice system anyway and work on changing that.
Thank you. That was actually going to be my next question, but thank you, Angia, for helping me to get to that point, right? So that's true, right? The best way to minimize the sort of human carnage that comes out of our criminal justice system is to have less people going into that system to begin with, less people penetrating that system. At Just Leadership USA, we have a very local campaign to shut down Rikers in New York. And what it's taught me is how localized these issues are and how much power and control localities, states, and local jurisdictions have over criminal justice policy making. In many ways, we have hundreds of criminal justice systems across the USA, but the events in Ferguson exposed the role of a number of things, including fines and fees, and the role that those fines and fees play in stoking resentment and anger in communities that are most impacted by the criminal justice system, but also the way that people are sent from prison to debtor's prison. Given that these are issues governed by cities and towns across the country, what can the federal government actually do to end what we now are calling debtor's prison?
So again, and you're going to hear a recurring theme about these issues. We had a White House convening on this issue too. And we had people who there as participants. So we have learned, as you all have been saying, that we need to go closer to the people who are impacted by these things in order to learn what it is we need to do to fix them. So September 14th, we are having another convening next week in my office as a follow-up on the addressing the fees and fines issue. So I need to start by saying that we understand that it's a complicated system, and that the system was not designed to be debtor's prison. It was that a number of localities have constraints on their tax base, and they were looking at it as a creative way to finance operations. Now that we've brought this to people's attention, because we talk about collateral consequences, it's a collateral consequence that people just weren't thinking about. They weren't thinking about the fact that you are taxing and fining the very people who can't afford it. And we got rid of debtor's prison in this country a long time ago. There are constitutional rights that people have when we assess fines and fees. And so what we're doing at the Department of Justice is we will announce later this month, in a couple of weeks, grantees. We put out a solicitation for demonstration sites for communities who wanted to help us figure out what are alternatives to these situations. How do we deal with things? You can hold people accountable without putting them in prison because they're poor. And so we are funding demonstration sites, we are funding technical assistance providers, and the judges across the country are focused on this, and we are providing some financial support to help with that work. So it is, again, front and center, an issue that we are focused on that will not go away, no matter who's sitting in our seats, and we're focused on it.
So I got time for one last question to you, and then I'm actually going to break the rules and just take 2 questions from the audience, 1 man, 1 woman. So I'm breaking the rules. I know I'm going to get myself in trouble, but I'm going to do it like Oprah. I'm going to come out in the audience. I'm going to hold the mic. You're going to ask a question, and we're going to move on. So here's the question. So when we were at the prison about 1.5 years ago, and Vivian and I were there, and we were thanking you and your colleagues for the Pell Grant Experimental Sites Initiative, bringing college back to 12,000 students across the country. I remember you said, yeah, but we ain't done yet. And you said, bam, 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 bam. And I counted every single one, right? And I was like, okay, I'm gonna follow all of those bams, because to me, that meant that you guys were thinking about many other things to come. And obviously a lot has come since then, but can you give this audience a preview of some of the new initiatives that are currently underway at the Justice Department? Which are you most excited about and have the most traction and would be the most important?
So the bam, 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 he keeps a better checklist, but I don't make a promise I don't intend to keep, and I think that they know that. And so one of the things that we have done, and a lot of these things, again, we're asking communities to partner. A lot of the stuff that's happening, it's because of the Reentry Council and the partnership, and not worrying about who gets credit. So, the Pell Grant announcement was a result of a lot of conversation, a lot of commitment, and I want to give a shout out to Jim Shelton, who now works for the Zuckerberg Chan Foundation, who, when he left the Department of Education as the number 2, I said, Jim, you didn't get the Pell done. He goes, it's going to get done. I promise you it's going to get done. And he kept his promise, and it got done. And he's out there still championing this kind of work from the private philanthropic side. One of the things we did is we transferred money to HUD to go into the public housing projects. For anybody who's 25 and under, we're working on expunging or sealing criminal records. We will be announcing later this month the person, the grantee who will work on the clearinghouse for expungement of records for adults. And so that's, that's something that's going to be nationwide, and it's not going to be restricted to you, to figure out how do we make sure that people's records are cleared so they can continue to proceed. One of the nice things about the time that we're in is this is a bipartisan movement. Everybody recognizes how important this issue is. And my view is, I don't care if some people come at it from an economic perspective because it's too expensive to keep doing it the way we've been doing it. I prefer if people come at it because it's from the humanitarian perspective, because it's the right thing to do. But I will take whatever it is that gets us to doing the right thing. And I think that as you do the right thing, you do change hearts and minds. And so that's why I say keep doing that. I know I've forgotten some of the things that I should be mentioning here. We've done the Medicaid change to make sure that there's coverage. And now people who are in halfway houses have access to affordable health care. Last year, through BJA funding, we made sure as part of our reentry portfolio that we were trying to work with agencies that do the reentry work to make sure that they knew how to make sure that their people who were coming to them knew how to access affordable health care. That's huge. That's huge. One of the success stories I love to talk about the Reentry Council is agencies that were not part of the original Reentry Council are dying to be part of this. I was on a panel with Secretary Fox of Transportation, and I said, do you realize you all aren't part of the Reentry Council? He said, we're not. We are now, and they're in. It's a club people want to be part of. Working with you all is something that is important to all of us and important to this country's success. So I'm sure I forgot some things on the checklist.
It's all good. But when you said bam, 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 you could have given me a heads up about the whole private prison thing. That caught us all off guard. So I'm going to come out in the audience. I see one hand over here on my left, and I'm going to take a question from, say your name, the organization you represent, if you do represent one, and then ask a question, please.
Hi. Thank you very much for your time, and thank you for having us all here. My name is Reverend Tammy Garrett Williams. I am the founder of the Above Waters Project in Colorado. We're the only organization that is taking care or advocating for those that are living within the halfway houses within the state of Colorado. My question to you is on the scope of, I've been hearing the news where we've been listening and hearing about private prisons being able to be shut down or non-existent in the future. However, my question would be, seeing that, I also see that community corrections in my state, and I'm sure it's across this country, is beginning to grow in large numbers. And I feel that with that being done, it seems as though the private prisons are being taken away, but there's another form of incarceration that's private prison, to me, in community correction. Are you going to be focusing on that? Because we advocate solely for those in Concord, because we see that there is another problem, as you brought up in regards to Medicaid, because we worked on that in Colorado, the Above Waters Project, to state that they're in the gap. They do need that closed, and I thank you for closing that particular piece. But in regards to mass incarceration, it looks like it's beginning to have another face, and it's Concord.
Yeah, so
Thank you.
Deanna and I were just talking about that's been in the news, and I think that the way we're going to, continue to get people to understand that the practices of the 90s did not work. They hurt communities. It's going to take that you all have got to continue to keep your voices loud, strong, collective. Because I love your oath and your code that this is a collective effort, not about individual efforts, because it's the unified voice that's going to continue to make a difference. And so the federal government has heard you, and there are a lot of things that we can do policy-wise through how we prioritize who gets our federal funding for corrections money. And I'm looking at Deanna, because you got an advocate right there who understands who's in charge of the corrections portfolio. But you've got to speak up and demand things. And what we can do is The Reentry Resource Center, which is a website with all kinds of resources, go to that, use the materials and things that are there in your local communities, use the research that's there. We all know what works. My chief of staff there in Pride always loves to say, we know the answers now. The question is, do we have the political will and the courage to do what needs to be done? So we know that we have used our penal system in this country to deal with social ills that do not belong in the prison system. We need to fund mental health care. We need to fund drug treatment. We need to fund alcohol treatment. We need to invest in our young people and give them opportunities to keep them out of the cycle. We need to invest in you all. And so we know what works. We know that people coming out of our correction system, if they have a connection to their community, an opportunity to work, if they have an education, we're never going to see you in the correction system again. And where's Andrea? Where'd she go? Where'd she go? She moved. What I was going to say is that universally what you hear of people who receive, oh, there she goes, the clemency, is they're like, we're not coming back. Because you don't have to worry about us because we recognize the gift we've been given with this. And I think that we all, as a country, need to recognize the gift that we've been given by having you all back out in our communities and really, truly welcome you home.
Okay, so I said two, but I said a man and a woman, and I ended up picking another woman, and Nate was like, nah, bruh, you said a man. So, first of all, when I gave the first mic, she said I'm a reverend. You're not a reverend, right? No. Rabbi, priest, any of that. Okay, cool.
My name is Nate Williams. I was actually one of the first juvenile tried in the state of California as an adult. I did 13 years. I applied for the fellowship, didn't get it. My question is, why wasn't it more offered? More fellowships, because a lot of us need to be in it. We don't just need one or two of us representing us.
Right.
We need more of us representing us.
So,
and I was a good candidate. They said I was a good candidate and all this and that. But in the end, I was turned down. I'm like, okay, I respect, I honor the brother that's in that position, but I also want to go in there too because I represent a lot of people too. I represent juveniles that's tried as adults. I spent 32 years. I got a lot to say, and I got a lot I want to offer.
So thank you for that. And one of the things I did not say is the pool of candidates that we had for the first Second Chance Fellow was phenomenal. Phenomenal. It was. Oh, I know. I'm getting there. Give me a little time. I got to work up to it. Give me a little time. I want to at least acknowledge that he was good and that there was a very, very good talent pool. Now, in terms of increasing the number, what you got to understand is I have a limited pool of money. And so there are choices I have to make. So the money we use for the fellowships is less money that goes out in other programs. So it's something we have to balance each year. We talked about next year, next time we do it, having two, not one. But again, it depends on funding levels and making priority choices, unfortunately. And so it's inaugural. And and what we did was when we have more people than we talked to our federal partners to say, you need a fellow too. And so it's not, we are trying to demonstrate, and I think that Darryl has superbly demonstrated the value of having this kind of partnership, and we will continue to talk to our federal partners about how to expand that. But it is, I hear you, and I'm with you.
All right, you see Dorsey standing up there? We know what that's about, so let's make this last one brief, please.
Yes, I just wanted to ask you a question. My name is Itlalmina, and I'm from the Chicano Mexicano Prison Project. And please understand that we are not Latinos. We are Mexica, we are from this land. And my question for you is that a lot of our families and children have been locked up on the border, and they've been locked up for many, many times just because they crossed the illegal line that divides our land. And you haven't addressed that. We want to know what is it that is being done by brutalizing our children, our people on the border.
Thank you.
So thank you for expressing the concern and reminding us of the concern. I will take that back to my leadership and the folks who work on this issue. That is not something that I'm equipped to talk about today, but I can tell you that I am hearing you, and they can tell you that when I say I'm going to let somebody know, I am going to let the people know who do handle it about your concerns. So thank you.
Thank you. Let's get a round of applause for Carol, please.